headphones or a translation into French, then please ask for headphones at the back. There will be maybe some questions later in French, so then we will try and accommodate that too. But yeah, so overall it will be in English, so feel free to go back to get the translation. Yes, so well, thank you everyone for coming to the session. Happy to see you all here, and to talk about the role that DFIs play and the impact they have on the ground. As you know, DFIs are development banks in a way, established by governments very often, who finance projects that otherwise would not get funding, and who provide higher risk loans or equity and guarantees. They all have a different point of focus, either in terms of geographical regions or the type of portfolios or the size of portfolios, the max share of equity invested, for example, or through either focusing more on equity or more on loans throughout. So we have 6 DFIs here with us today, and they will tell us more about the important work they do and the mechanisms that they have in place to do so, and we will hopefully be able to tackle a bit more also on how that can maybe go even further, and address any questions you may have. So let me quickly introduce the panelists to you. So we have Inigo Azpeitia, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, who is an investment officer at Cofidis, which is the Spanish DFI. He mainly works in financial inclusion operations and impact investment funds. So he's in charge of EU relations and blended finance programs. Then we have Vivek Pradhan, who is investment manager, infrastructure and climate at BII, British International Investment, so the British DFI therefore, with a focus on debt financing to energy access companies such as solar home systems, mini-grids and CNI. Landry Ahwensu, investment professional with a decade of multi-sector debt and equity transactional experience in sub-Saharan Africa. Then we have Medjo Yolande Ouafo, investment officer at Proparco, the French DFI. She specializes in project finance, power and infrastructure as well, based in Abidjan, and covers 14 countries in Western Africa. Robert Volskuilen, experienced project and corporate finance professional in the renewable energy industry, with more than 16 years of experience in the FMO, the Dutch DFI, and who has worked as senior and principal investment professional in renewable energy in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. He's also managed the energy-related Dutch government funds, and his transaction and sector experience in both energy access and distributed generation, as well as utility scale projects. So now, since 2023, Robert is heading the East and Southern Africa team within the energy department there. And then we have as well Fabrice Bolo, is that the right? Investment manager at Norfund, so the Norwegian DFI. Then I don't want to take too much of your time myself, as it's all about the DFIs. So let me maybe start straight off with some initial questions. If you could basically all say something about your respective DFIs and the mechanisms you have in place. So maybe Inigo, if you would like to start, if you can tell us about Cofidis a little bit, the mechanisms, and maybe about the SOL program that you're setting up.
Okay. I don't think this is working.
Sama?
Is this one? Oh, much better. So thank you, Julia, for the presentation and for the invitation of being here today. I'm Inigo Azpeitia, and as Julia very well said, I'm an investment officer at Cofidis, which is the Spanish DFI. She's an state-owned company founded in 1988 that has, if you may, three main main objectives and three main branches, if we could say. The first one is the tied one. It's tied to Spanish interest. It focuses on the internationalization of the Spanish companies. Then the one I work at, which is the untied financing, which is Cofidis by law is the investment advisor of the Spanish Corporation, of the Spanish Agency for International Cooperation, EAIF, which is the manager of a fund called FONPRODE. In Spanish is el Fondo para la Promoción al Desarrollo, which is fund for the promotion of development, which mainly does three main kind of operations. It does sovereign loans, so state to state. It does loans to mainly microfinance institutions, and it also participates in equity in investment funds. And since a couple of years ago, the Spanish government gave Cofidis the mandate to set up a fund called FONREC, which is directed to helping Spanish companies who were hit hard by the COVID-19 crisis. Also, Cofidis is a founding member of FFP, which is the Association of European Development Finance Institutions, and is an accredited entity both to the EU to manage EU funds and to the Green Climate Fund. At the moment, we have three programs managing the blended finance under the EU framework, and I'm going to focus on the one I'm here today for, which is the renewable energy program for sub-Saharan Africa, which supports mini and off-grid projects in sub-Saharan Africa, mainly in rural and peri-urban areas, in order to increase access to electricity in such areas and promote productive uses of energy. This program is supported by a 20 million euro guarantee for the European Union, for the European Commission, the EFSD, and also a technical assistance component of 2 million euro. This guarantee, this program is a joint program. All of our programs are joint programs with the Spanish Agency for International Cooperation, EAIF. It's very important to mention that as it promotes collaboration between entities. And with this guarantee, FONPRODE is able to provide up to 28 million euro in subordinated debt to projects SPVs on concessional terms. By being subordinated, of course, it means that these projects, these SPVs, must also have senior financing from other institutions, and it also, for the skin in the game, it must have equity from the sponsor. And right now we are in the due diligence process of some of these projects, and we launched a request for proposal. And given the appetite of the sector, we set up a new program which has received a positive opinion from the EU, which is called SOL program, which is a sustainable off-grid lighting program, and it's an extension of the actual program, and also it's a much bigger program, and also it has an extension to a new region, which is also, as Africa is, a priority for the Spanish cooperation, which is Latin America and the Caribbean. And with this program, which is, as I said, the EFSD Plus now, operational board gave its positive opinion to. It gave its positive opinion to up to 76 million euro guarantee, which around half of it would go to sub-Saharan Africa, and this would mean that FONPRODE would be able to provide this subordinated concessional finance loan, for up to 50 million, and support projects for up to 150 million. And finally, it would also include a technical assistance component, which for us is essential for the correct performance of the program, which would be divided in two phases. One aimed at promoting capacity building and pipeline origination, and the second phase when we already select projects for the program to focus on the design and construction phases. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. If maybe Vivek, you would like to elaborate a little bit on BII and the mechanisms, and maybe also the countries that you mainly focus on, if there is a specific.
Sure. Hi, Vivek here from BII. We're British International Investment. For those of you not familiar with us, you may have known us previously as CDC Group. We changed our name at some point last year. And yeah, so we're BII. So essentially we're the UK's DFI. We've been around for a little bit over 70 years at this point, doing a large variety of things. I think we started out as being more of an equity investor, and then moved into being a big fund investor. But now we've been, over the last 10, 15 years, really ramping up on our debt portfolio as well. So really our investments span equity, debt, and funds as well. From a geographic standpoint, historically, BII has concentrated on basically all of Africa and South Asia, but recently, in line with kind of the UK government strategy that was announced last year with respect to international investment, we've also expanded our remit slightly to also include Southeast Asia and the Caribbean as well. So we're becoming a little bit more global slowly. So as far as the activities that relate to what we're doing here today, I sit within the infrastructure and climate vertical at BII and on a sub-team called Energy Access and Efficiency. I guess the name is relatively self-explanatory in the sense that we're energy access focused, and for that, what that means for us is really decentralized or distributed renewable energy. Historically, we were focusing on solar home system companies, pay-as-you-go SHS companies, but over the years we've expanded to basically be trying to do everything pertaining to decentralized renewable energy. So that includes mini grids, of which we're hopefully going to be making our first few investments soon, and also a large component of commercial industrial solar. I would call it small scale commercial industrial solar, whereby we're funding developers more at the portfolio level through corporate loans as opposed to doing any sort of project finance. That's another team. So I think, that's basically where we are right now. Most of BII's investments to date, it's all one pool of capital, and we're wholly owned and funded by the UK government and owned by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. But most of our capital is qualified as growth capital, which is essentially to somewhat larger, more mature businesses. But for our team, the Energy Access team, we're working out of a pool of money primarily that's called Catalyst, which is essentially designed to take on a little bit more risk for earlier stage, more nascent sectors, and I think that's where the majority of our investments have come from to date, and we also are more recently managing a smaller pool of capital called Kinetic, which is actually meant to directly take, in some instances, first loss and help to de-risk and encourage other DFIs and commercial investors to come into the distributed renewable energy sector. So we're hopefully that we can touch on later as we talk maybe more about blended finance and concepts like that. So I'll leave it there and over to whoever.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Landry, maybe if you could elaborate a little on IFU, the mechanisms and something on climate finance, your position on that.
Yeah, sure. It's a pleasure being here. Hi, everyone. IFU is the Danish DFI, so from Denmark. We've been around for a bit more than 50 years now. And for those of you who wonder why you have never heard about us, it's okay, there's a reason for that. Until recently, also until 5 years ago, we had a tied mandate, meaning we could only invest in Danish companies going abroad or in projects where there was a Danish content. Our mandate has not been on site, so we are more generally open for business, so feel very welcome to reach out. We are a group of about 100 investment professionals across our headquarters in Denmark and 8 regional offices across the globe, 2 on the continent, 1 in Kenya, 1 in Ghana, where I'm based, and covering the region. We invest in low and middle income countries across 4 main verticals: financial institutions, agribusiness, so the entire value chain, healthcare, and renewable energy. On the renewable energy, we also do wastewater, or I shall say we would like to do more waste and water. It's still to be developed. So far, we have invested about 6 billion euro in a bit more than 1,000 projects in more than 150 countries. And talking about energy, which is the reason why we're here today, we have in our portfolio around 1,500 megawatts of installed capacity. I wish it was DRE, but not yet. More utility scale project, but renewable energy project. And yes, that's for IFU in general. If there are 3 points I want you to take away from this intro and who IFU is, I would say the first one is that we are an equity investor. So when it comes to instrument, we invest more in equity than we do debt. In our portfolio today, I would say it's 80% equity, 20% debt. So that talks to who we are. The second point will be the funding structure, so the way we operate. So beside our traditional DFI activity and balance sheet, we are also fund managers. And the importance of that will come along the conversation because you will understand the way we assess the risk. Fund manager, we raise resources from both public and private sector, mainly pension funds and family offices in Denmark, which we then we deploy. The last fund that we've raised is a 700 million euro fund, which we call Sustainable Development Goal Fund. We are nearing the end of the investment period. We'll be raising next one soon, and total asset under management today is around 1.7 billion euro, all across our funds. Projects that we are looking for, and that's the third point I want you guys to take away. The first thing we'll be looking for is impact. I'll say impact and climate. So that's a deal breaker. If there's no impact, if it's not climate oriented, then we cannot do it. Right? The second point is the risk-adjusted returns, and I'm sure we're gonna have time to discuss it all throughout the session. And that is related to the fact that we are a fund manager, right? So not only public resources sitting in the back, but we also have commercial money in the bucket. And the last point, which is not the least, is the partner. We need to work with strong partners, right? We are not expert, we do have experience, so we need a strong partner that knows what he does and that we can lean on. Mechanism, as I said, we fund manager. I'm not gonna go through all the funds we have at the moment because I'm gonna take all the session. I'm gonna go through the main one, so I've presented the SDG one. And to give you a clear example of what we have been able to do with that fund, we have invested in CNI. So it is possible to use these commercial funds and invest in CNI, a company called Daystar in Nigeria, which we have recently exited also. We also have a Green Future Fund, which is a 150 million euro facility, out of which we can do debt. That's the only one that can do debt at the moment. I guess we'll have the opportunity to come to some more concrete examples of what we have been able to do with that money. But this money is here marked to green transition projects. So it's really neat. I mean, for us here, the array fits perfectly within the scope. So no discussion there. We also have a small facility which we call high risk, high impact. This one basically is whenever throughout all our funds we are not able to sort of reconcile risk and return, when we need some softer money, then this small facility is in there to allow us to do some blending and access and finance transaction we would not have been able to do otherwise. Right? And finally, a mechanism that is not internal but that we have started to use more and more is EFSD+. especially through the blending that is available at the EU level. And yes, so all these facilities can be used on a standalone. We can sort of be creative depending on your project, mix them all together to reach the optimal risk-adjusted return target that we need. I'll pause here and pass on to whoever wants to take the mic.
Medjo, I'm still on speaker. Medjo, if you would like to tell us a bit about Proparco and maybe also more specifically what you do in Western Africa, since you're focused on that area yourself.
Thank you, Julia. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having us here. So I'm representing Proparco, which is the private sector wing of the group AFD, Agence Française de Développement, which is the French DFI. We've been around thanks to AFD for more than 140 years, but Proparco has been installed throughout the African continent, but also in Asia and Latin America for more than 70 years. I am representing the regional office of Proparco covering Western Africa, which means that there are 4 other regional offices covering the rest of the continent. And basically, yes, I'm specialized on power and infrastructure business development, for which we have a lot of instruments that we can use, from equity to debt, but also guarantees, subsidies, and yes, that's basically it. On decentralized energy, since it's the topic of the conference today, we tend to do as our Danish friends and only invest in equity, because we feel that's where the need is really needed, especially in Western Africa, because as I'm sure you can reckon, there is a different dynamism in Eastern Africa on decentralized energy than in Western Africa. It's a less mature market, but it's a market with plenty of potential. So that's why we feel equity as the right instrument to be a part of, to use. But we also have other instruments that we can have access to thanks to our mother company AFD and our sister company Expertise France. Especially on decentralized energy, AFD is quite present and active on the public side in the extension of electrification, especially in rural areas. And Expertise France has a program which is called MAX, which aims at maximizing the impacts of the decentralized projects that we do throughout the continent. Because as Landry just said, the first, maybe the first criteria that is very important to us in DRE is impact. And that's the first measure that we want to have. So the MAX program from Expertise France allows for consultants to be hired through that fund, but also for subsidies to be invested in projects. So Expertise France and AFD are working on the public and consultant side. Proparco is working on the private side, and we basically have already invested in companies, players that have first the impact, as we say, the impact vision that is very important to us, but also the track record and the right setup for the project to be well conducted. So for example, Daystar is one of the companies that we invested in as well. We also invested in PowerGen or in Delight. And basically what we observed through, thanks to those 5-6 years of experience with investing in DRE, is that we are moving a little bit away from the SHS market, which is undergoing some changes and challenges at the moment, and focusing a little bit more on CNI, and basically accompanying the productive use of electricity in decentralized area. I will stop there, but I'm happy to continue later on.
Thank you. Robert, the floor is yours. Could you tell us a little bit about FMO and
Yes,
mechanism and
of
your
course.
experiences? there.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, so we do the same as the others. Let me pause there. No, no.
Fine, yeah.
So we're a bit younger, I realize now. I didn't know that some of my colleagues have been around for 70 years, 60 years. So we are a bit more than 50. We are solely private sector focused, and energy is one of the focus sectors, besides agri and FI. So energy, we see energy as an enabler to create impact through job creation, economic growth, reducing inequalities. That's on the inclusive business side, and last but not least, climate business. And it fits also. I mean, the way we see the market is from a sort of graduation model perspective. That means that we focus on the pioneering side in the very early stage. Then you move on to the developing side, which is a bit less risky, and then finally, when projects really become bankable, it's about scaling up. And scaling up for us also means that really commercial or private money should be involved, and that is unfortunately something that we are not really seeing in the energy access space, and also not really still in the utility scale space in Africa. That's also still a bit scarce. So I think that's a focus, how to crack the nut also in the DRE sector to make it more scalable, more bankable, and to attract more sort of larger pots of money, basically. We have, I think, our suite of products is a little bit similar to what my colleagues mentioned. So we go from private equity, venture type of investing on the PE side to the senior debt project finance type of funding, and anything that is in between. We also have what we call government funds available, and those can take a bit more risk, much more risk, albeit with a bit of return, so it's not fully concessional. And we deploy those funds also to make projects more bankable. Looking at the DRE space, we have basically started out there in probably more than 10 years ago, and since then we've invested or lent over 200 million to projects in sub-Saharan Africa, roughly 30 projects. I think it's a pretty decent result. Of course, not enough, so it must be much more. We need to grow that. But I was reading that a 22 Gogla report, and it was estimated that 2 billion has been invested in the DRE space in Africa in the last 10 years. So then we conclude that we have added roughly 10%. So I think that's pretty decent, but still, of course, not enough. So we cannot sort of lay down and rest. I think we together all need to try to come up with structures that make the DRE sector more bankable, and I think DFIs, I think all of us here, can really play an important role there. Let me stop there.
Okay, thank you. I have to speak more into the mic, I just heard, so I'll try. So Fabrice, over to you. If you could tell us a bit more about, it's a bit difficult to talk like this.
Thank you. I don't know what to say now. I mean, they've said everything. Well, thank you for joining us for this session, and thank you for the panelists as well. So Fabrice Polo from Northern. So Northern is basically the Norwegian investment fund for developing countries. What we mean by that is simply sub-Saharan African countries, some Latin American countries, and some Southeast Asian countries. It's pretty much straightforward. It's pretty much Norwegian, right? So on top of that, in terms of our footprint, similar to what I just said, so we have 3 offices in Africa. So where I'm sitting, it's in Accra. So I'm heading investment for the West African, Central African Francophone side. I'm looking also to add opportunity into Anglophone from time to time. We also have a new office since last year in Cape Town that oversees Southern Africa. So if you're closer to that, happy to share contacts with my colleagues over there. And obviously we have our regional African office, which is in Kenya, and which oversees, of course, the Eastern African side of the continent. We also in Bangkok for Southeast Asia. And of course, if you are closer to there, I'm sure you are not, but just to let you know. And of course, in LATAM, we are based in Costa Rica as well. So Northern is basically, was established by an act of parliament, so it was definitely a political decision by our owners to create Northern as a fund. So similar to BII initially, and to IFU as well, and to some extent FMO. So we are only or primarily now, we've always been an equity house. We barely did any debt transaction until very recently. Equity represents about 85% of our balance sheet on our business, and will continue to be the same. We try to do some debt transaction, but we definitely believe into long-term patient capital. That's why we do equity. In terms of ticket size, $5 million euros in minimum. We try to start, and we like to start at 10. But again, following the comment from my colleague Robert, definitely there is something to be done there on the more difficult transaction that require a bit smaller size ticket. So we can start at 5 million as well. In terms of instrument, I mentioned equity and debt, but I just want to mention also bad news compared to my other colleagues here. We don't have concessional funding, so we don't do that. It's pretty straightforward for us. We do straight equity. We can do obviously mezz. We can be extremely flexible on that side. Our debt is extremely commercial, if not classic commercial debt from a DFI perspective. We have a very small what we call very small soft window or soft money window that provides early financing for developing projects, so mainly for sponsor of project. It's a really small envelope, very competitive, so the first one comes in, first one gets it every year. And then obviously after that, pretty similar to the other DFI, we also have a technical assistant facility that allows us to accompany projects on non-commercial point as well. What we do every single year, 60%, close now to 55 to 60% of our business is energy. We are very well known to invest mostly in the energy space. And also, if you want to focus on DRE, we have done some key transactions on DRE as well. We invested in equity and obviously in Baobab Plus. We are an owner there. We have financed, obviously, Delight, the MCOP of the world. The Relight as well. We've pretty much done all of the main guys except for the French guy, B-Box. We haven't done B-Box, but the rest I think we have done. I think what I just want to mention now, what was very interesting, is that we have participated into a very key, I believe, for the sector, which is basically a discounting, or you can call it a receivable financing facility with the US TFC. About 238 million in Kenya, that allowed basically the sector, at least in Kenya, to get some working capital financing, revolving of course over 2 years. I don't want to be too long into the technicals, but I'll stay here. Everything has been said already. So thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your insights. Yes, maybe some more targeted questions to the panelists. Thinking of where I should start here, but many questions. So Landry, in terms of, could you elaborate maybe on the perception on DRE in emerging markets generally, and could you give some concrete examples that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if I had to answer in a sentence, is it working now? Oh yeah. No, I mean, if I had to answer in a sentence, I would say there is the future, right? I think we have never seen a country develop without energy. I think we all know these data points about half of the population on the continent not having access to electricity. And also that other one about Africa hosting the youngest and fastest growing population. So when you add all these together, I mean, something is not adding up, right? There's definitely something we are not doing right. And I truly believe that DRE is part of the solution, right? There might be other, but definitely DRE is part of it. When you look at the situation of our utilities in most of the countries on the continent, it's certainly not that way that we'll use if we want to electrify the continent. So no, definitely DRE is a big thing. That being said, coming back to, I think the second part of your question was how we sort of support the sector, right? What we do toward DRE. I think in the intro, I've mentioned that we have 1,500 megawatts in renewable energy. For us in EAIF, at least, DRE is pretty new, quote unquote. We are more used to traditional IPPs. And for financiers, as you can imagine, whenever something is new, we have to approach it with a lot of caution, right? So not that we are close to the idea. I've mentioned we have done DSTAR recently with some of the colleagues here. We have exited. We are currently looking into solar home system transaction. Unfortunately, I cannot disclose the name. It has been approved. We are just proofreading the contract. We will sign soon. We are also looking into a very interesting company related to the space that will sort of provide financing to the DRE company so that they can on lend to the end users. So we are approaching the space from all the different angles possible. We are not the one that invests the most, but we definitely want to do more and more in the space. One last example that I can give, there's a discussion about if we qualify this as DRE, but it's in the clean cooking space, which I believe is also DRE, right? Because all this conversation about just an inclusive transition, if we don't take care of the clean cooking space and all these trees that are being cut every day, I think we'll have very hard time to reach the goal. So we have financed Spark Plus Africa Fund, which is a clean cooking fund. They are based out of Nairobi. This was also an interesting transaction. I think we're going to have the time to go through it, how we were able, I think I've mentioned that we have several facilities, we can be innovative, sort of mix them all together to reach an optimal risk-adjusted return, and that's what we've done together with the EU on Spark Plus. So early stage, we want to do more, and we believe this is the future. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Actually, something all of you touched on in some way is also, or most of you, is investing or not in CNI, smaller, bigger, etc. But to what extent do you think enough has been invested or is being invested in the SMEs and the smaller sectors, if you like? And so maybe a question to several of you who've touched on that, but I don't know who wants to.
Yeah, happy to start, Julia. Yeah, the CNI space is very interesting. It's somehow, yeah, let me just call it a bit more bankable, or a lot more bankable actually, and it's very much scalable, easy scalable, and that attracts other pots of money, right? And that's also why it is able to grow. I think we distinguish between two sort of forms of CNI. So on the one hand, maybe CNI companies that serve more blue chip-like companies, if I call them like that, but if you have them, so the more creditworthy off-takers. And then on the other hand, you have CNI companies that also focus very much on the smaller segment. Smaller companies, more smaller SMEs. And that's definitely also a very interesting market. We are serving that market as well, and increasingly serving it. In all fairness, so when we do that, then it's most likely that we use a fair bit of our government funding that still can absorb more risk than what we can do with our own balance sheet. And with the part of the CNI that I mentioned in the beginning, it's our own balance sheet.
Okay, thank you. Anyone would like to touch on the subject?
Yeah, happy to. I don't want to repeat everything that Robert said because we definitely agree on the importance of CNI and why it's easier for us TFIs to finance or invest in those kinds of companies from a credit point of view. But Vivek mentioned earlier that at BII they tend to invest at portfolio level because we see, especially in Western Africa, a lot of smaller CNI projects. That's also the view of the market that we have at Propelco, which is why, because our equity instruments are a bit bigger for those companies, we start around 2 million euros, but our average ticket is around 5 million euros in equity. Usually it's a bit much. So what we've done is that we invested in a fund that is dedicated to providing debt for CNI companies, for CNI projects, which is called AfriGreen. And they have the capacity to finance projects or invest in projects at a smaller scale and thus help the targets that we cannot reach on our own. And we also invested in CNI companies, but I wanted to highlight the fact that it is a very dynamic market, a market in which we are happy to take the risk and in which we find the ways to address the issue. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. If anyone, yeah? Or other?
Well, I'll just quickly add that, I mean, when it comes to CNI, I think if you had asked us a few years ago, we would have said, and we did say actually, that CNI is really, really going to take off in Africa, across Africa, and this is the time. And it's been a little bit slower than we had anticipated, but with that said, I think now maybe in 2022, 2023, we're starting to finally see signs of like the momentum that we were eventually expecting. I mean, for large CNI, where you have blue chip clients and very, very large credible off-takers, we've already seen in some emerging and frontier markets that sector really mature quickly. I think India is a good example of that. But then from an energy access, I mean, we think about everything we do at BII, from SHS to mini grids to CNI, on the spectrum between energy access and climate finance. And as you go down towards the scale, more towards energy access, and you're talking about CNI as it pertains to small and medium enterprises, it does present a much more challenging proposition, as I think everyone is aware, particularly when it comes to really kind of understanding the nature of smaller businesses being credible off-takers, which I think it's been proven time and time again that SMEs can definitely be very credible off-takers, and we have CNI companies all over sub-Saharan Africa that are proving that. But I think the risk perception, commercially certainly, and perhaps even from DFIs, still has yet to catch up with the reality that small-scale CNI is certainly going to be a huge part of driving energy access forward and filling in a very important gap between smaller solar home systems, smaller mini-grids, and then the large-scale CNI and much larger project finance that you have towards the climate finance angle. But it's a challenging proposition still.
Thank you. Actually, touching on what you, or a question rather, on what you were touching on just now, the other side of the spectrum, sort of home systems. What do you see how do you see the future as a DFI for the sort of home systems, and what do you see as challenges potentially, or any takers?
Yeah, I can take that. I think on the solar home system, what has happened obviously in the past, we all know, we have had a lot of failures, a lot of beliefs in that being sort of a unicorn on the continent. And I think even us DFIs have realized, of course, that some of these investments that we've made were just made to make the market the way it is today. And it's a good thing, because that's our place. This is what we need to do to ensure that a market like this blossoms. The importance of SHS, the SHS business in general, in my view is that one needs to be a bit careful now because we are getting to maturity. Careful simply meaning now where do you target your actual market, as a company that potentially play into multi-countries. The question is simple, for example, would you come in Côte d'Ivoire to do SHS today? These are some of the things that at least one needs to ask that question. You cannot be very global about the fact that, yeah, we can just put money here. Would you go to Cameroon? Would you go to DRC? Or maybe would you stay in the Sahel region? Those are the questions that are very key. And my belief now, I'm not sure if I'm going to be right about that, but we see the market changing a bit. On the pure SHS, if I take out the appliances out, I'm just keeping the TV, the classic one that the TV, the battery unit, of course, and some of the bulbs. So that's the key market where you can actually provide quick access to people to have electricity. I feel like if you're sitting in the city, for example, everyone will agree that you won't do it here. But you have SHS businesses that still come to Côte d'Ivoire to do it. That's also a question I even asking myself, what's the business plan? Because this is a country that has so much hydro, that's going a lot on gas, and that certainly on the government side, they're looking for larger, big farm of solar project instead of the SHS business. So I'm just putting that contracts for some of the developers or people who are financing the industry to note, because this is really key. However, there's a lot of countries that are really looked upon. I'm not sure, not in the right way. If you look at countries like Mali, for example, like Chad, right, where the grid doesn't barely go anywhere, like DRC, if you take outside the east of the country. That's where, in my opinion, the focus should be in some of these countries. And then, of course, the cherry on top is definitely going to be the more established country, more secure country like this country, like Cameroon, like Senegal, and XYZ. Because never forget, the public policy about energy is key to drive your off-grid. If the grid catches you, as we always say, if the grid catches you as an off-grid player, you're dead, because it's coming. So you need to make sure that you are able to target your geographical footprint very well, because it's a mass market business. So I think I just wanted to share that contract, because we see that and we just invested in Baobab Plus, which does SHS, right? But they are moving now into sort of appliances. That's where we feel the game is going. So hopefully, I think there are some of these that can be shared, or maybe can be discussed as well amongst us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Robert, maybe, or any of the others?
Yeah, I don't know. I agree. On the other hand, we've been doing a lot of SHS business, and it's a bit less now. There are a few winners, clearly, at least for the time being, and we're still supporting them. But there are also so many other sort of subsectors in DRE, like mini grids, metro grids, that we also want to support, and where there's also a lot of sort of work to be done. Not the least to make it bankable. I can continue about that, but I'm not sure what if you want to change topics.
Majo, I think you're.
I just wanted to jump on what Fabrice said. I totally agree with the fact that you need to know your risk, you need to know your regulatory framework in order to have a bankable project. And we see that from the SHS point of view, there is a diversification towards appliances. It is a fact, and I think it's a very good thing from a credit point of view. From Proparco, what I would say, maybe just to make sure that we don't forget that, is that the impact remains the main goal. So basically, the kind of SHS company that we tend to look away from are those who tend to forget about actually bringing electricity, and who focus on selling TVs, phones, or even bigger appliances. But it is, on the SHS market, it is definitely quite urgent to to back the credit solidity of the company, and appliances are one way to do it. That's for sure.
And maybe if I can add one small thing. So sometimes these maybe tier 2, tier 3 companies are too small for us to reach out directly. One of the pillars in our strategy is also to invest in funds that have a more sort of easy or paved way to the market. For instance, the Energy Entrepreneurs Growth Fund, managed by Triple Jump. They're in the room as well. It's one example of us also supporting, let's say, more the lower side of the market on the also on the SHS space.
I might just elaborate a little bit more on SHS, because it's something I think we should hopefully be talking about a little bit more, because I think it's the narrative around SHS has been a bit unfortunate, I think, and to a certain extent the industry has been somewhat victim to the hype that surrounded it for a very long time, and I think that's unfortunate because solar home systems, at least our view at BII, is that they're still hugely impactful. There's obviously, it's a very challenging proposition to provide high quality products in an affordable manner to bottom of the pyramid demographics, and that's always going to be very challenging. And I think you had a number of solar home system companies that were trying to do it while also perhaps having a lot of equity funding, trying to become unicorns, and trying to do all that without subsidy. And the expectations for being able to grow multi-billion-dollar solar home system companies with investors making huge exits, those never really panned out, unfortunately. And so that, I think, has caused a lot in the energy access sector, whether it's DFIs or commercial investors or even grant providers, to kind of sour on solar home systems. And now kind of we've seen a lot having moved on, essentially, and looking at mini grids as the next big thing, or small scale CNI as the next big thing, when the reality is that I think there's still a huge need for solar home systems and their accompanying products and appliances and whatnot. And perhaps just the problem was not that it can't be commercially viable, but that it's extremely challenging to make it commercially viable, and therefore just like energy as is provided anywhere else in the world requires subsidization, requires concessional financing, to really make it work. And I think we're seeing a lot of companies diversify away from being vertically integrated, very high cost solar home system companies, and starting to specialize a little bit more into various aspects of the value chain. And I think that's been really good. And we're seeing some of these smaller solar home system companies that we, as the DFI, wouldn't have been able to support in the past. We're seeing them have much more clear pathways to profitability. And so I think there's still an argument to be made. And so I hope that, in conferences such as this and the GOGLAs and all of those, where SHS was the dominant topic over the last several 5, 6, 7, 8 years, hopefully that doesn't go away too much. But that's all.
Thank you. You also touched on something that Robert alluded to as well in terms of concessional financing. Would you want to share your thoughts maybe on the role of concessional funding?
You're
Both of
asking
you.
me? Both
Yeah,
of us, yeah.
uh,
Well, I think Vivek actually touched upon it just now, indeed. And I mean, your words, but you said, all energy basically requires some form of concessional financing to take off. And that's absolutely true. That's also in the on the utility scale projects. Think of how transmission systems, grids started off. Think of how distribution companies are mostly still government owned, and then sort of taking that in mind, and then sort of transposing that sort of to the, for example, the mini grid or village grid sector. There, the developer is asked to basically do everything in one go. So, and to come up with a small transmission system, to come up with a grid, to come up with a collection system, as if it were a disco, and then also, of course, to provide for the generation. So it's a multi sort of a multitask company, and yes, I think you do need some form of concessional financing there. The pity is that it's always being looked at from an individual asset basis. And ideally, you would look at it maybe more on a program basis. In Nigeria, they rolled out a large program for mini-grids. I'm not saying that is the best sort of solution, but a program solution for so concessional funding to be deployed towards mini-grid, acceleration of mini-grid construction and development. I think that is the way to go. And also from a financier's point of view, I think you should not always be only looking at the business model and determine then that it's only bankable if you get the concessional funds. I think you should take the concessional funds sort of, well, not for granted, but that is how you fund your capex to a large extent. You set up the system, and then you basically look at how the mini-grid is being operated. And then, of course, it's also about maintenance capex and replacement capex and everything. But that part, that should be at the end viable. But I think we should not focus too much on the fact that you do need some concessional funds in the early days, basically to start the project.
Thank you. Maybe going a little bit further to the other side of the the panel as well. You mentioned ESFD plus, and yeah, would you like to elaborate a little bit on that and to what? Well, you've already alluded to it a little bit, but to what extent you've been able to use that and the challenges and opportunities you saw there.
Well, now it doesn't work. Okay. Now this one better. Yes. Well, yeah. Our programs are the two programs we have. Well, the one we have at the moment. The other one is it has a first positive opinion, but it's not yet signed. It's under the framework of the EFSD of the EFSD plus, and I think in this sense it provides guarantees guarantees which make FONPRODE and the Spanish Corporation being able to provide financing to the projects that otherwise it would be quite difficult for us, and so it would not be possible to finance. Therefore, it opens a new market, and it helps us being impactful here in the region. And also it's EFSD Plus is part of Global Gateway, and I think DRE fits very good in Global Gateway because one of the main investment priorities of Global Gateway is connectivity and climate and energy, actually. And it's not just about what you can just providing energy, it's what you can do with such energy. Therefore, it touches digitalization, it touches transport and e-mobility, it touches healthcare, it touches education. Therefore, it fits very well, I believe, with this European approach. And if I may, open a debate, how can we do more? How can we play a bigger role? I believe joint coordination is fundamental between states, between EU delegations, between DFIs, between companies, between sponsors, because Global Gateway and EFSD plus or EFSD, for it to be effective, it should be taken into account with a Team Europe approach, right? Also, the role of private sector. We, the DFIs, we can we can catalyze, and we're here to, and I talk about more about Cofidis and ICID. We're here to catalyze private investment, but as we heard before, the gap is massive. We cannot go just with the public resources, and so private sector is key. And finally, to play a bigger role, it is important to focus also on communication and visibility, because mainly because it proves a demonstration effect. It demonstrates impact. This is what I can do by showcasing successful stories. It builds trust, and it builds credibility to the sector, and it attracts more financing.
Thank you. Landry, you also
Yeah.
touched on EFSD Plus.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I fully buy into what Inicio has just said, right? In the sense that definitely this EFSD, and I got it right this time because I sort of interpret the F and the S. It's a very good framework, right, in catalyzing private investment into the space. I've mentioned before that we have done an investment in the clean cooking space. We are replicating it in the dairy space, but this one I cannot disclose. But so, long story short, and I've also mentioned that we have different facilities that we've managed, right? Traditional DFI money, which has a certain risk appetite, commercial money, pension fund, which is more risk adverse. So when we got that transaction, for example, looking at our facilities, this is something we could not do. We could not do because of the returns, right? So we sort of discussed internally, we blended some of our high risk, high impact, so internal facility with traditional DFI, still not meeting the returns, right? So we had access to the blending facility on the EFSD Plus, which was able to sort of come, it's a fund investment, so they were able to come with the first loss tranche. Very competitive return that they want, it's a first loss. And after that, we were, as a DFI, able to sort of blend both our commercial money and the public money, because as Inicio mentioned, public money is limited, right? So at some point, the private sector needs to kick in. Having a DFI in the fund, it sort of shows this demonstration effect, and we were able to attract other LPs to that fund in a sector that is not really profitable for now, right? We're talking about clean cooking, right? So basically providing clean stoves to people that were used to just cut trees and cook, right? So this is really the bottom of the pyramid. Now, in terms of challenges, I would not say it was a challenge to access this facility. It was more a long process. But looking back, I would say it is worth it, right? Because, I mean, some of you might know, you need to be, for some facilities, pillar assessed, which if you had to go through, it's, yeah, I mean, basically they assess some pillars, how you operate a company, because at the end of the day, those are public funds that the DFI is, or the entity is to manage. And after, it's a pretty long process, but once you've gone through that, then it opens the door for like huge potential, right? So there's money available out there, and this is a call to our developer partners. If you are still struggling in sort of meeting the returns of finding the right structure for your project, there's definitely a tool that is worth looking at under the EFSD Plus framework.
Thank you. Any of the others would like to touch on it, or not necessarily? Okay. I guess we can maybe open up the floor to the audience as well, if you have any questions. Yes? Okay, so do we have anyone with a mic? Do we have a mic? Yeah.
My back hurts, I need to stand.
Oh, just before, not for your case, but for any future questions, if anyone wants to ask a question in French, please do let us know straight at the beginning, so some of the panelists can put their headphones on and hear the question. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Julie. Very interesting panel. I really appreciated the discussion. So my name's Steve Kokota. I'm with the International Copper Association, and we develop and implement sustainable energy projects in Africa alongside partners like ARE. A lot of the work that we do is focused on energy efficiency. I didn't hear a lot of mention of it directly anyway, but if the banks are focused on climate, the funds are focused on climate, energy efficiency is the greatest share of action that's needed for energy efficiency, right? There's not enough investment in that space. So my question is, if, you know, I know it's a big question and not everyone needs to answer it. If anyone could comment on your thoughts on energy efficiency. And then just to say that, you know, we've developed through mission efficiency an energy efficiency financing facility where we do project origination, de-risking, matchmaking in this space. So if anyone's interested in getting involved in that, let me know.
Can you give an example on the energy efficiency project that you...
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So on grid, okay, all grids around the world have transmission distribution losses. In Africa, the losses are unusually high. So for every 100 kilowatt hours of power that's generated, you know, as few as, you know, 60 or 55 make it to an outlet in an African home and business. So, you know, there's solutions that can help alleviate at least some of those losses, right? But it's, you know, it's a difficult investment proposition. So, you know, we're trying to build, for example, a project in Zambia and maybe the DRC, but the financing needs to be behind it. Thank you.
Anyone would like to?
Yeah, no, I echo it actually, and it is maybe with some DFIs a little bit below the radar. We have some. We invested in an energy efficiency fund, but that's not in Africa. That's in Latin America, and we do come across occasionally some propositions, but still not too many. I think also so there's even we have a metric to assess it and to make sure that it qualifies with our climate investment objectives. But yeah, it's just, yeah, we don't see that many. And it's of course not your more traditional energy generation, whether it's RDE or grid connected. So it's a bit of a different animal, but definitely as important. So thanks for the contribution.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, again, you're right, Robert, thanks for that contribution. We also don't see a lot of that, but just want to mention that something's happening in Nigeria on that topic. We are looking at it very seriously, which is mostly on extending the grid, but making it better with the private sector. So definitely something we can chat about.
Yes, thank you very much. It is a very important issue to tackle. I have to join my colleagues and say that we don't see that much projects from the energy efficiency world dedicated to the private sector financing, but our mother company AFD looks a lot more at those issues, basically because they work on the grid. The example that you provided, it would be perfect for AFD, but also because they can accompany the government towards initiative in that sector. So I would be happy to touch base as well, in the hope that there is something for the private sector, but being sure that there is something for the public sector on that front.
Thank you. Sir, if you would like to... French,
Okay.
probably, or...
Oui, French.
En français. Juste comme ça, on sait qu'il y a quelques-uns qui doivent mettre leurs écouteurs d'abord.
Ok, donc vraiment, je vous remercie. Je voulais simplement témoigner un peu concernant le Mali. Je suis du Mali. Mon nom, c'est Kounima Dambélé. Je dirige une entreprise d'électricité qui s'est spécialisée dans le solaire et l'efficacité énergétique. Alors, le problème, je suis en même temps vice-président de la Fédération des énergies renouvelables au Mali. Alors, le problème que nous avons là-bas, c'est que c'est l'indisponibilité des ressources humaines de qualité qu'on a. Et l'ambassade du Royaume du Danemark l'a bien remarqué et a bien voulu mettre à notre disposition un fonds qui permet à nos entreprises de former les agents. Et mon entreprise est l'heureux gagnante de ce fonds. Et présentement, au moment où je vous parle, ils sont en formation. Maintenant, la question, c'est à M. Landry. Alors, après avoir aidé les entreprises à former leur personnel, est-ce que je dois comprendre que vous êtes aussi prêt à apporter des capitaux pour qu'elles puissent monter en échelle? Merci.
Déjà, félicitations donc, pour votre staff qui est formé en ce moment. Non, non, clairement, je pense que la réponse simple est...
Landry, sorry, it's more for the headphones.
okay.
He's got a translation. If you wouldn't mind speaking in English,
In
sorry.
English? Okay, no,
Just
no worries.
so the rest of the audience will understand.
Okay,
as well.
super. No worries.
If that's okay, sir. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, the simple answer is yes, right? And let me just step back and mention to the broader audience. So I think what you benefited from is a facility that we have available. So whenever we invest in a country in a certain project, right, and we sort of see that there are some bottlenecks in the system, it doesn't have to be related to the project per se, but for example, we have an IPP project in Mali, right? If there's a great issue or there's an issue that sort of surrounds the project, then we have a facility that is available to sort of help the entire ecosystem. So I think what you have benefited from is part of this facility. And definitely, I mean, the objective is to sort of extend more financing to the sector, right? So if we have extended the facility to sort of train the staff, and now they are back, I think it's logical that if there's like a viable project in the back, then we'll be more than happy to sort of look into it and see how we can sort of scale it up a bit more. If that answers your question.
Metro or no? Anyone? No? Okay, thank you. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Hi,
Go ahead.
Mark van Doesburg, Triple Jump. I think we touched a bit upon the challenges we see in the SHS sector. What we see, and I guess everyone sees, is that there's clearly a lack of equity in the sector. I mean, equity funds have difficulties being raised, and we see these companies which are often not profitable really getting into wind down mode pretty quickly if they don't raise that equity. So my question to basically all of you is, do you see a role for yourself as a DFI? Thank you.
Anyone want to take the challenge?
It will be difficult to answer no to that question, right? No, definitely. I think definitely, I think we have a role in there. I mean, we have to play our partition. Now, the challenge is twofold, right? At the same time, I mean, and now I'm talking for IFU, and if my colleagues sort of experience the same, they'll add to it. We are getting a lot of transactions these days, and they are very small. I've seen on the forum website, you know, this brain date application. There was a session with a title which made me smile because it was what I mean, it's my day-to-day. So the title was Open for Conversation for Financing to CNI that are EBITDA profitable. And that way it becomes tricky, right? We are all, I mean, the sector is pretty fragmented. So I don't know if at some points some fusions might need to operate so that we get to a certain scale where we can look into those projects. For IFU, for example, we are sitting on a lot of money that we would like to deploy in this sector, but because of the size, right, the scalability, and also, I mean, we have said a lot of good things on the DRE sector, but it is a risky sector, especially the SHS, right? Because where your revenue are coming from is really the rural population sometimes, right? And there's a socio-economic dimension to that activity that you need to master. Otherwise, I mean, it's pretty easy to go wrong, right? So these three things are challenges that we see. Again, size, profitability, fast-moving sector, right, risky sector, which sort of slow down the pace, if I can put it that way, on what we would which we could do in the sector. But definitely we have a role to play in there. And that's where the EFST plus facility, for example, will help some way, somehow. Mea culpa will need to be more adventurous at some point. But yeah, it has a limit to, I mean, there's a limit to the level of risk we can take with regard to the resources we have. But I think the ball is rolling, progress are made. My colleague from BII has done, or FMO has done 20% or 10% of the investment in the space.
Yeah,
So we're getting there.
That was Robert's.
Okay. So we're getting there.
No.
Yeah, but
We've done far more.
that was not all equity, huh? So
I might actually just take a second to respond to that. It's an interesting question because on one hand, is there enough equity for the SHS sector? No. Should DFIs do more? Yes. Should everyone who's investing in the space do more equity? Sure, that'd be great. But then on the other hand, it's been a bit strange in that for the leading companies in the SHS sector, the tier 1 companies, you know, if you want to call them MCOPA, Greenlight Planet, D-Light, B-Box, et cetera, they have had a disproportional share of the equity that's going into the sector, and actually oftentimes quite large equity tickets from some very sophisticated private equity players. You know, 20, 30, 40 million dollar tickets for $100 million rounds with, you know, very sky high valuations. And I think, you know, it would certainly help if that equity, that shows that there is equity available for the sector, but it's not distributed very evenly, which is unfortunate. But then at the same time, all of these companies who have received large amounts of equity do still struggle to, from one extent to another with profitability. And so I think that's also caused perhaps a reduction in the excitement around equity investors in the solar home system space, because they've realized that the path to profitability is indeed extremely hard and challenging, and, you know, perhaps it's not the most appealing for, you know, commercial or even impact-oriented private equity firms. And so yeah, perhaps DFIs could do more, not expecting those types of returns, but it's a hard proposition to work with.
Fabrice, I think.
No, thanks for that. And you're absolutely right, Vivek, on that. Where did the money go? That's the question. Right. The money went to the people you mentioned, mostly in the industry. The other guys who came in did not get the kind of rounds that we saw with these people. Good or bad, we don't know. I firmly believe in the regionalization of SHS player. I don't think, for example, G-Light should be in Cameroon or in Senegal. It doesn't make sense, right? They tried DRC, they failed, right? B-Box is maybe the player that is really trying to do that well, but we need to see the numbers. I'm still holding on that. But I just wanted to answer your question by also saying, what is really equity in this sector? For me, equity in this sector is working capital. Profitability will come from working capital, will not come from equity. So, and the simple example, and I've had that with a very small SHS in DRC. It's a very simple example. They have about a 6 months lead time to get the kit in the country. 6 months. And we're asking this business to raise equity, maybe 10 million, fine. But they have to service hundreds of thousands of households. So in 6 months, they're burning cash, a lot of cash in dollars. And when they get the kit down there, they still need to take it to Bakongo, what if you know DRC, basically to those villages. And even in Kinshasa, 13 million people. You know, the transport, the lead time on transportation, it's crazy. So as an investor, when you come in and you're asking this business, just show me your return tomorrow. You know, I mean, I just don't get it. So the working capital side needs to be addressed. For me, it's the first thing. If you get it done, you get it revolving, you make sure the company has access to working capital, therefore providing that cash they need for that time. I think the rest, in my opinion, maybe I'm simplifying it, but it's getting pretty simple. B-Box is backed by Strategic, right? D-Light has the money from most of the investors. So they have that equity and that they can put in working capital. Same thing, obviously, with the SHS backed by the MNOs as well. So you have a couple of these names that are backed by either the Orange of the world, the Safaricom of the world, and you have others that are backed by the French, big energy players. Then you have the other guys. So the other guys is actually the majority of the business. And guess what? On the SHS business, you have between, I think it's for 75 or 80%, most of the SHS players rely on leasing. So there's no cash business there, really, except for Barber Plus and some of the other players, 2 or 3. The rest of them really rely on the best management of cash possible. So I think if we manage to solve that, I'm not sure we can do that here today, but I think that's really key. This is very pragmatic. You get $1 in work capital, you're getting a return of $1.5. That really makes sense for me. I think the rest is a little bit of a conceptual note.
Thank you. Last word from someone on that? Okay. So maybe the last 2, 3 questions, I don't know, at least one here, and then we have to round up slowly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for this panel. It was really very interesting. So I introduce myself. I'm Sanat Hishami. I'm working for Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. And we are supporting Power Africa program, and more specifically the Zeto Power Initiative, which is an initiative focused on Sahel countries, and which focuses on on-grid power generation, off-grid and decentralized solutions, agricultural usages of energy, and also electrical transmission. So it's a kind of, diversified initiative. And as I'm talking about Sahel countries, and I'm glad that we had a question about Mali, we have some countries that are suffering from political risks. So I was wondering what kind of guarantees we can bring into this initiative. For example, we can imagine in order to tackle this specific risk to these regions, knowing that these are very interesting regions in terms of solar potential and in terms of impact, because this is, the lowest regions in terms of electrical access, and also the level of poverty is really very high. So any investments, mainly in on-grid, on rural electrification, would be very impactful. So will match evidently to all the criteria you are looking for. So I was wondering how, what kind of guarantee instruments and concession funding or facilities you can suggest to this specific kind of political unstable, regions. And thank you.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Allow me to start. If you had asked the question a year ago, I would have spoken for like 10 minutes. Unfortunately, I'm representing a French institution, and France in the Sahel is not at her best moment. In any case, you're right. Those kind of countries are the one in which you have the most impacts, you have the most opportunities, and you might have the best story to tell, because the governments are not deploying the network as they would want to. But I would recommend that on those countries, well, apart from the security risk that is a reality, but a reality with which we can live. And I think I'm speaking at least on behalf of some of my colleagues in here. We do finance on-grid projects in Burkina. We do finance on-grid projects in Mali. So there is fund going to those politically unstable countries. But you still have the question of the regulatory framework. We see that example, for example, a situation, for example, in Senegal. Senegal is very stable. We don't have any issue there. But from the regulatory point of view, it is blurry at the moment. And it hinders the development of CNI, SHS, and other off-grid projects. So I would say that once you find a DFI, which will not be Proparco, unfortunately, that is willing to go on those countries because they are happy with taking the political risk, you need to be very precise on the regulatory risk as well. And if the other DFI have a public sector wing, see how they can work with the government in order to put the right framework. Because we would not want, especially in Western Africa, we would not want to see another Senegalese scenario, because it was the perfect country to deploy off-grid, and it still is, but it's missing that regulatory piece.
And maybe to add, so I fully agree with that reading from Yolande. Not just regulatory framework, but I mean, you need to look at specific cases. So what if you have concessional funding available, where it's best used? I think the one thing we all agree upon, that should not end up to support the returns per se of the sponsor. So it should improve bankability, and then everyone wins. Off-taker support is sometimes something which is very important and very much lacking in many fragile countries actually, and also non-fragile countries in Africa. So some form of backstop liquidity support backing up the off-taker payments. I think that's something that I'm thinking of. I echo Yolande. We have invested in utility scale projects in Burkina, in Metrogrid in Chad, and there are more examples. But you really need to look specifically in what's lacking in terms of bankability, and there deploy the concessional funding that you mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. We unfortunately have to wrap up, but yeah, some more questions maybe that you want to address, but feel free to do that during the matchmaking or in the coming days. So yes, thank you all for coming. The next point on the agenda, I believe, is actually matchmaking, so feel free to go down to the main hall. And yeah, have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.